Here is the key reason why I think, so basically, it's of course hard to estimate these things, but a rough estimate is that about 2/3 of the world is religious. But the most important thing I think you need to pay attention here is the fact that there is very strong evidence that religious people have higher fertility rates than non-religious people, and this is true even matching for income and education. Okay, so if you look at the census data in many countries, we match people in income, education. We look only at variability of religion. People who are more religious are having more children. This is a powerful trend, which means that what's going on is that secularization is happening in fewer and fewer of the people in the world. So as countries become more educated, more wealthy, more industrialized, they have fewer children, they're less religious. The vast majority of the world is not wealthy and educated, therefore most people in the world are and remain religious. That's the conclusion. Okay, so having said that, let's look at some of the things that people believe in that we need to explain, just to whet your appetite about religion. So these are based on surveys done in the United States. Depending on how you ask the question, about 90 to 96% of people believe in God, 93% believe in hell, but only 85% believe in 93 in heaven, 85 in hell, wishful thinking. Psychic and spiritual healing, 54%. ESP, even something like ESP, 50%. 1 out of 2 Americans believe in ESP. Haunted houses, 50%, etc. Okay? We need to explain this. Why is that people believe in these kinds of things? Dismissing these beliefs doesn't really help us. We need to understand. We truly need to engage and understand. Now, you might say that, well, that was data from the United States, and you might say belief is cheap. People can just say, I believe in this and that. Do they really mean it? So here is a massive survey that was done by the Gallup organizations around the year 2000, and now I'm zeroing in here on a question that is very conservative. The question is, how important is God in your life? And this is the percentage of people say, very important. This is the extreme end of the scale. And if you look at the average, these surveys, and look by region, you can see again the vast majority of the world's population in places where the vast majority of people are living are deeply religious. 97% in West Africa, Latin America 87%. Middle East is not here, but it would be high up there, of course, if they had it here. The only places where you don't find enormous amount of religiosity is Western and Eastern Europe, where you have 1 out of every 2 individuals saying that religion is very important to their lives. Okay, so how can evolutionary science explain religion is the question that I'm asking in this talk. And in the last 10 years or so, there has been an exciting new developments in many disciplines, ranging from psychology, anthropology, economics, sociology, biology, where these researchers who are interested in this question are converging and coming to the conclusion that evolutionary perspective is going to be extremely important in understanding what is religion, how did it evolve, how does it fit into our human nature, etc. The one thing I want to warn you, however, is that this is a very new field, and there are lots more questions than answers. I'm going to give you some tentative answers in this talk, but most of what we need to do remains to be done. However, I could say with relative confidence that religion has been upgraded from a scientific mystery to a scientific puzzle, to paraphrase Chomsky about language. So, 20, 30 years ago, if you asked researchers what is religion, they would have had puzzled looks. Like nobody knew even how to approach the question. Now, we actually have testable hypotheses on the table where we can ask intelligent questions. Before I jump into the rest of the talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges that the evolutionary study of religion has to face, to overcome, to become a viable discipline. Very quickly. So one is political and moral opposition. There's a reason why many scientists shy away from the study of religion, because it's a sensitive topic. Studying the evolution of religion is not like studying vertebrate vision. People that care deeply about religion, they either love it or hate it. Usually, that's my experience. I haven't met many people who are indifferent towards religion. And there are a number of oppositions this enterprise. I'll mention two. One comes from people who are religious themselves, and this might not be surprising to you. Religious people don't like their beliefs to be scrutinized. But I think this is a mistaken belief. I don't think that understanding the evolutionary foundations of religion is going to somehow undermine religious belief any more than understanding the evolution of motherly love will stop mothers from loving their children. So I think this is based on a misunderstanding, but it's a commonly held reaction towards this kind of scientific research. The second opposition actually it surprised me more when I first started this research, and the opposition comes from some people from the atheist community who believe that studying religion makes it legitimate. And there is this perception that if religion is part of human nature, then somehow it must be good and just and true, which is something atheists, of course, disagree with. And again, I think this is a mistaken belief. You know, we call that the naturalistic fallacy, right? Just because some aspect of behavior is part of human nature doesn't mean it's good or desirable or true. You know, violence is part of human nature doesn't mean that we like it or approve it, right? But this is the context in which we have to work. That's something important to realize. The rest of the obstacles are more scientific issues. One of the important ones is how do you define religion? Because if we want to talk about the evolution of religion, if different people define religion in different ways, then we can't even start asking the question. So, and there are many definitions of religion, of course. So that's something important to overcome. The second problem is the cultural variability. So even though religion is universal, it exists in every culture we know of, we also recognize that there is a lot of cultural variability in what people believe in. How are we going to account for that if we have to explain religion from an evolutionary perspective? And finally, and this is probably the least important issue, but it does come up in the when discussions of the evolution of religion, and that's the question of how do we define adaptation. And I want to be clear here is that in this talk is that at least we can talk about adaptation at least in two ways. One is the strictly Darwinian sense of a naturally selected adaptation, genetic evolution, but there are also a lot of speculation and theorizing in this field about religion as being a social or a cultural adaptation. So the transmission mechanisms are not genetic, but they're cultural, and I want to consider this an important distinction. Okay, so how do we overcome these issues? So the issue of the definition of religion is, I think, gradually being overcome by researchers in this area by considering religion as not as a category, but as a convergence of a multitude of elements that come together. And once we realize that, then the definition problem goes away. So instead of trying to explain or theorize about the evolution of religion, what we can do is we can theorize about the components of religion. So we can talk about ritual. How did ritual evolve? We can talk about supernatural belief. How did the supernatural belief evolve? Perhaps the notion of sacredness might be something that could have evolutionary roots, etc. So we're not talking about religion anymore. We're talking about what the foundations of religion, and I think that's why research has become much more fruitful in recent years. This is in contrast to the common sense view of religion, where we tend to think of religion as a unitary construct. You know, we ask people, "Are you religious?" as if it's one single thing, but in reality, I hope to show you that there is no such thing as one single religion construct. It's just a convergence. It's a category. It's a family resemblance category when there are multiple things that converge, and when these tendencies converge, we just call it religion. Okay. The second problem that I mentioned, of course, is the cultural variability problem, and that problem also, to a great extent, diminishes if we take into account what many evolutionary researchers are now calling for considering human nature in a dual inheritance perspective. I'm borrowing this term from Boyd and Richardson, but many other evolutionary researchers use these terms. The idea here is that when we try to understand human behavior, we need to take into account not only genetic evolution, as we do for the rest of the animal kingdom, but also cultural evolution. Genetic evolution, of course, operates by the usual standard Darwinian processes of selective random variation and selective retention of genes. It's slow and the replication is faithful. In contrast, cultural evolution, which is a powerful aspect of human evolutionary history, is analogous to the genetic evolution, but it's not as faithful. The replication is not as faithful, and the transmission is much more fast and can be powerful. So you can get changes in much more quickly than you get from genetic evolution.